the fact that you can make something and hold it in your hands and test it is really rewarding compared to a lot of other experimental research. So I could test, I tested all kinds of things, and it also doesn't matter what you test. You can make something, test something crazy and throw it away. So I had an entire series of tests that I called Kill the Cement and Resuscitate It, where I tried to dry it out and see what happens if you try to rehydrate it again and that type of thing. So but there's no, it's not like I did anything with that work, right? It could have turned into something, but it didn't matter if it didn't.
Hi, and welcome to this month's episode of Engineering Greatness, an original podcast produced by the American Concrete Institute. I'm Megan Boss, an assistant professor at the University of Evansville in Evansville, Indiana. With me today is Maria Younger.
Hi, I'm Maria Younger. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, that's located in Austin, Texas.
Welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by discussing why we got interested in civil engineering in the first place.
You want me to start?
Yes.
All right. So I'm hesitating as I answer this question because my interest in civil engineering is a little bit different than most people who are part of the American Concrete Institute, in the sense that I never studied civil engineering. I haven't taken any civil engineering classes ever that are formally civil engineering classes. I studied chemistry and material science, so chemistry as an undergraduate student, and I looked at possibly changing into engineering and even took the initiative to go talk to a professor to ask what it would take to switch to engineering, or if I didn't switch to engineering, which classes I would need to take to go to engineering graduate school. So he gave me advice, and I took a few engineering undergraduate classes and then went to material science and engineering for graduate school. But I would say I was never inspired to study civil engineering, and in fact, really never would have chosen it. But once I started here in a civil engineering department at the University of Texas, there's so many interesting things that the people around me do that I find myself learning every day and being excited and inspired by the things that they do. It's just not something that attracted me as a student, but I would say I'm fully immersed in civil engineering and aspects of civil engineering now, but I never would have predicted that when I was a young student. What about you?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that is neat, though, because that lets people know that you can still be really involved in the American Concrete Institute, even if that wasn't your original intention or your main area of study. For me, I was very interested in math and science as a kid, but hadn't really heard about engineering maybe until high school. And my dad said, "Oh, you might be interested in engineering." And then I think as I took more science classes in high school, I started to enjoy when we did experiments and applied science from the textbook into an actual activity. And so engineering was just that on a bigger scale. You're applying the math and science concepts you use and seeing how that really impacts, the world and people. And I went to a few classes and camps about introducing people to engineering that made me think civil engineering was the one I was the most interested in, because I really did like structures and building construction, those sorts of things. So that's why I focused mostly on civil in my undergraduate studies.
So I find it interesting that this speaks to a generation gap, I would say in general too, that when I was in high school, I tried to find out what engineering was, but I couldn't get an answer from anyone in my community, from anyone, my guidance counselor. They always just said, "Oh, if you like math and science, you might like engineering." And so the idea of even applying to an engineering school was intimidating, even as somebody who liked math and science, because I couldn't get a definition of what it was. It wasn't until I got into college that there was even better information, because you could talk to students who were studying engineering, you can look at the engineering curricula. So I think a lot of things have changed, based on what you're saying. Things have changed in terms of awareness and opportunities, because there's summer camps, there's the internet, you can start going and looking at resources to try to understand what you like better. There's all kinds of tools available. And like you said, things that you can do in school that can inspire you and help inform your decisions. Where I felt like when I was that age, it was really, really just kind of a blank, open question unless you knew of a neighbor or someone else who was an engineer or a family member, it was really difficult to get information. So I'm happy to see that there's more encouragement now and more information for people. I mean, not just, of course, your age as a professor, but also the younger people entering the field. It's great to hear that.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of prospective college students, and many of them do have the opportunity to even take engineering focused courses in high school, which I think is really neat. That gets them interested and aware of what it is that engineers do.
Yeah. So I saw too that that you went to Valparaiso University as an undergraduate. Is that because you're from Indiana? And so when you took this position as a professor, does that mean you were returning home to your roots?
I'm from Wisconsin actually,
Okay.
but it was only about 4 hour drive away from Valparaiso, which is in the north side of the state, and now I'm on the south side of the state. But it was closer to home, and I did my graduate studies at the University of Florida and did want to get a little bit closer to family, so I moved back to the Midwest to try to be closer to parents and everything. But yeah, I'm not originally from Indiana, but now it is my home, so
That's great.
I've
Yeah,
been enjoying it.
my experience was similar in that I went to Duke as an undergraduate because my father was a professor there. We got free tuition as kids, which was a big bonus since I have two brothers also. And he found that when I was looking for a school, I kept looking for a school that was like Duke somewhere else so I could go away. And he thought that was ridiculous. And so I went to Duke as an undergraduate. But then I really, really, really needed to get out of there. Not that I dislike Durham. Durham is a beautiful, wonderful town. It's a lot more interesting now than it was when I was growing up, and bigger now. But I needed a change of scenery. And so I found it interesting that you moved from the Midwest to Florida, which one could see as like an escape to the warm weather. And I did the opposite. I went to Northwestern because I only applied to graduate schools that were in cities because North Carolina is basically a giant suburb and rural area without an urban center, at least at that time. And I wanted to be in a city. And so I applied to Northwestern. And then I also wanted to see what it was like to experience snow in a location where I wasn't planning on living permanently, so that if I didn't like it, I didn't have to actually, live with snow forever. And it turns out, I enjoyed it while I was there. But when I was ready to graduate, I was ready to be done with it. So yeah, then I went to California and then came to Texas and haven't looked back at cold weather.
And what drew you to the University of Texas? Which I've seen you've worked there for a long time now, so you must enjoy it.
Yeah, I've been here for about 23 years. So, I mean, I think it's similar to many people when you go on the job market, you end up looking at a lot of different places. And for me, and again, this is increasingly common, my husband's also at a university and was looking for positions too. And so we ended up with offers at two different universities that we were comparing. At that time. And then UT Austin really was the best match. It had a great program for him. He's a biologist, and it had a great program for me in civil engineering. And so when I was looking at programs, even though my background was in chemistry and material science, I was looking primarily at civil engineering universities because of the application of cement material science to civil engineering. It was a better fit. So that was, really lucky that at that time we were able to get two positions here and we're both still here, which is also really lucky as well. But I think one thing that I've seen too in people's careers is that you're increasingly trying to balance, especially in academics, um, people with two different careers in couples that need to find a location where they can both live and work, whether they're both in academics or working in some other field. And so most of the people that we interview, we're not allowed to ask them, who if you have a partner or not, and if they need a profession. But it is a significant effort that's made on the university's part to try to place partners when someone has been given an offer. Ahead of that, no. So in terms of, since we've been talking about college and then that transition from college to faculty positions, one of the things I find as a faculty member is a lot of our students are really engaged and interested in these activities like ASCE Concrete Canoe, the ACI student competitions, and those kinds of things. I didn't have those when I was a student. but I see how exciting that can be for students, and it helps them engage with their career path. So when you were as a undergraduate, even a graduate student, were you engaged in any of these types of competitions and things and clubs?
Yeah, my school had a pretty active ASCE chapter, and ACI wasn't as big, but it was sort of just starting. We were a smaller school, so I think when you have smaller schools, you have fewer extracurriculars and they're less concentrated in specific areas. So we did more of the broad ASCE, but we did do a concrete bowling ball competition for ACI, and that was the first ACI convention I went to, was for our concrete bowling ball competition as a junior in undergrad. So that was a fun competition to do, and I think it was nice for a smaller school like us because it didn't require 25 students like you might need to do a concrete canoe. So it was a little bit more accessible for us as a smaller program. And we had a fun time with it. And then, you get to bowl with your bowling ball and see it break. And that's sort of I don't know, it's a sense of pride for a student that you make something and bring it to a competition, even if it doesn't do well. That's something that I try to get my students to do now. I started as a faculty member right after COVID, and so a lot of the student organizations were trying to revive themselves a little bit, and there were students sort of interested in doing things, but they had never done them before because they had everything canceled for their undergraduate career so far. So trying to get them to start these projects up again has been one of my goals, because I like to see them create something and it's their own project, and then they get to bring it to a competition and have that sense of pride and sense of accomplishment, which I remember as a student being something I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can understand that. One of the things that made me laugh so much last semester is I was getting into the elevator to go to my office in our building here, and there was a student with a chunk of concrete in his hand. And I remembered that one of the lab sections for my class had just ended. And so even just that sense of pride of, I made a concrete mixture with a 3000 PSI 28-day compressive strength target, and I tested it in in the compression machine, and now I'm going to take this chunk home with me and keep it forever. I mean, there's a sense of pride in just making anything, right? Even if it's
Yeah.
not for a competition, it's just the joy of, I made this myself. I'm going to take it home. I'm going to show my friends. And then you elevate that to the competition where you can actually take pride in doing something more masterful, right? Not just,
Mm-hmm.
making something that's prescribed, and you get to take a little ownership there. That's really cool. Is that how you got interested in concrete materials, is through that competition then when you were an undergraduate?
Yeah, that was one of the ways. I was also involved in Engineers Without Borders, and we were designing a concrete tank, water tank, for a community in Nicaragua. And I think that also got me really interested because concrete is a very accessible material, and communities without advanced technology still use it as part of their infrastructure. So I liked that it could be used, it can be used for really high tech applications, but also just everyday people can mix concrete and make something out of it. And but I did like the hands-on aspect of that research, and that is why I was more interested in researching concrete in graduate school than really any other area in civil engineering, is that the hands-on aspect of it.
Yeah, I would say my interest was similar in the sense that I started out in chemistry. My first research project wasn't even on chemistry. It was with rat brains doing pharmaceutical work. So, yeah, not my favorite time. But then kind of advanced from there. And then I was doing organic chemistry where you're dealing with all these solvents, and you might be able to isolate the molecule that you were trying to create, maybe, right? After a lot of work. It wasn't very hands-on. I mean, you were physically doing things in the lab, but the link between what you were making and what you couldn't see what you were making, right? And so when I was applying to graduate schools, I thought I would work with polymers because I was really interested in recycling at that time. I mean, still interested in recycling,
Yeah.
but I was driven by an interest in recycling. And so I wrote my graduate education, or my graduate school applications on polymers. But then didn't really want to do the organic chemistry with all the solvents and that type of thing again. And there was something about cements that I just thought was really interesting and funny and different. At that point, in that era, everybody who studied material science wanted to do electronic materials. And my theory was that Intel that makes the semiconductor processing chips in your computers, they had a big advertising campaign that anyone older listening to this podcast would remember because they had these television ads where they were wearing these what they call bunny suits, which are basically clean room suits in these bright different colors. And so it was just this boom that the fact that even had advertising on TV when you can't actually buy the processor, you have to buy the computer, is kind of, curious now to think back on. But they had an advertising thing and everybody was interested in electronic materials. And I don't generally want to do what everybody wants to do because it gets a little like, I don't know, competitive and also I don't know, it's just less interesting to me. So I found this group working on cements and I thought it was interesting. And I like you said, the fact that you can make something and hold it in your hands and test it is really rewarding compared to a lot of other experimental research. So I could test, I tested all kinds of things and it also it doesn't matter what you test. You can make something, test something crazy and throw it away. So I had an entire series of tests that I called Kill the Cement and Resuscitate It, where I tried to dry it out and see what happens if you try to rehydrate it again and that type of thing. So but there's no, it's not like I did anything with that work, right? It could have turned into something, but it didn't matter if it didn't. And so that's what drove me to cements is that you had a lot of really fun questions to ask. And then only later did I kind of put together the recycling passion that I had early and bring that to what I do with cements now, which is, recycled materials and low carbon materials and sustainable materials. I kind of came full circle later. I started out with just basic science and then came full circle later to kind of link those two passions of recycling and sustainability with concrete. But I didn't really start there
Yeah.
because that wasn't a driver at the time. It wasn't what people were interested in, but it became interesting to me later.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then when did you start to become involved in ACI? You started to switch more towards the cement side of materials. When did your involvement in ACI happen? And was there somebody that introduced you to it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So when I was in graduate school, ACI was in Chicago for one of their conventions. And I remember that there were some people from ACI, probably the president at the time and the executive vice president, who came through for lab tours. But my professor, when I was a graduate student, did not go to ACI and didn't encourage us to go to ACI. But at that particular Chicago convention, there was a session of the 236 Material Science of Concrete was hosting a session. And this was at that time a brand new committee. And it was one of the first times that you could actually present and have an audience for material science type research, specifically at ACI. And so I went to that convention in Chicago and I laughed at the time because I lived near Wrigley Field and it was actually closer for me to get to the convention than it would have been to go to Northwestern that day. So it was just, very convenient. But I just spent a day there. I went in, I went to the session, I gave my talk, I listened to other people's talks, and I left. And then I graduated and moved to California. And as a young professional, it can be really challenging to get to ACI because it's cost prohibitive from the registration, but also from a travel perspective. So I didn't go for several years. But when I interviewed in Texas, everybody here was like, "Oh, you study concrete. Do you go to ACI?" And my answer was, "I can." Right? Sure, I'll go to ACI. So my first semester here, I went to an ACI meeting in Phoenix and and then have been going ever since. And what I found was it was just such a great community of people. I would walk down the hallways in the convention, and there were people I knew from graduate school, from Texas, from lots of different places, from other conferences I'd been to. And I felt it felt friendly and familiar. And what I also really liked about it is I felt like it was a place where I could get good mentoring as an assistant professor from people in my field who weren't necessarily at my university, but were at other universities and other industries that could give me mentoring at the ACI convention. So I created this kind of network of people who help you professionally. But then the other thing that was rewarding is I'd come back to the department here, and people would say, "Oh, I heard you were at ACI, and this person said they were in a meeting with you." And so it became not just a benefit to my personal network of people outside of the university, but it helped connect what I was doing as kind of a chemist and material scientist to the structural engineers here, because it gave them something that was a commonality between us. So from a career perspective, it was super helpful. And I mean, it's just been growing from there. ACI has so many opportunities for people, and whatever you choose, whichever direction you choose to take it, that I mean, it has something for everybody, I would say. It's such a huge organization with a lot of different pathways. So you said you went to ACI as a student with a bowling ball, which I think is really cool. But then you went to graduate school in Florida. And did you have a chance to then go to ACI when you were a graduate student?
Yeah, I went to pretty much every convention except for the COVID cancellation ones. And yeah, I was able to get one of the ACI fellowships, which helped fund my travel for multiple conventions. And then the student rate for conventions is discounted heavily, which was really great for me as a student because for some of those I was sort of paying out of pocket, but it was a lot less expensive than it would be for a professional to go. And then my advisor would pay for some of the conventions for me, especially if I was presenting, he would pay for it, which was really nice. So I was able to get more involved on the committee side of things that I didn't do when I was an undergrad student. And I was in the S committees, so the S802, teaching methods and educational materials, and then there's S805 and S806, one of them students and one of them young professionals. So as part of those, which was a nice way to get started in a committee if I didn't have a real technical area. And then similar to what you said, I was also in an area of study that was kind of new at the time. So I think you said material science was pretty new when you presented, was maybe the first time. And I was working on ultra high performance concrete, or UHPC, which was really new and still is pretty new. So I think I had that advantage as well, where the committees were just starting up and they were saying, oh, we need people to present, we need people to join committees. And there were a lot of spaces for new people to be a part of that, which was quite advantageous to me at the time. So I did meet a lot of people working on similar areas of research, and that was helpful to me. And I gained some mentors, especially through the teaching methods and educational materials committee, because now my job is primarily teaching focused. So they were great resources for me.
Okay, so you said your job is primarily teaching focused. Now, do you get to then mentor undergraduate students in concrete competitions, maybe, or is it, or do you any sort of students in research as well? To what degree do you get to mentor students in research?
Yeah, I don't have any research students. We are undergraduate only. So, I mean, if there was a student that wanted to do an undergraduate research project, I could probably do that. But right now, I'm focusing on the teaching side of things, which is really where my tenure committee will be looking primarily. I do, like you said, advise a lot of student organization projects. So our ASCE team has a concrete bowling ball this year, which is kind of fun because I did that as a student, and a concrete cornhole board and balsa wood bridge, right? All the different mini competitions that ASCE does. We've got teams working on that. So that's been fun. And then I do teach a materials class, and that comes with a lab. So we'll mix concrete and things like that. And I always have the students do a research lab where I say, you guys get into teams that you pick and research what you want in concrete. So that's kind of fun. I get to help them define the scope of their research project, and it's a pretty small scale, but it gives them the chance to design their own research project, which I think is something they don't do very much in college level labs, right? Normally you're just told to follow these steps, but I've had students look at, oh, what if we put coloring in the concrete? How does that affect our slump or our strength or lightweight materials in the concrete? So they get to choose, and that's my little taste of research that I do within my teaching.
That's great. Yeah, I had started in one of my classes, it's a concrete materials class. Um, I was teaching it every other year or so, and we would make general concrete mixtures with a variety of different mixture designs that were prescribed. But then I would do, the first time I did it, I did a high strength concrete competition with the students. And the next times I did a sustainable concrete competition and asked them to put a maximum amount of recycled materials in. But one of the funniest things was this post-COVID time that I did it, half of the students hadn't had lab in person before ever. Half of them had. So that was a challenge. But what I learned over time is for doing these types of research type projects in class, I learned that you had to give them a chance to have a trial batch because they always are so upset if they had big ideas and the big ideas don't pan out. So this time they had big ideas. They didn't, they weren't quite rigorous in their design. They didn't quite work out. They modified them. They did it again. And every single group in their presentation, they were saying, if I only had a third time, it would be great. And I thought, that's a little bit like research, right? You just got to keep going. You just got to
Yeah.
keep trying, keep iterating. So they learned quite a bit from that experience and it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And so I enjoy that. I haven't been involved in the actual student competitions through ACI or ASCE, but we do our mini internal ones and we have a good time with it. So it's fun.
Yeah, I think students like the competition side of things. I've never done a competition as part of a class, but maybe that's something I can do in the future.
Yeah, I'm not a competition driven person. I'm not competitive by nature. And so it's hard for me to just to understand why this inspires students. I see it, right? Like I totally see it, but it's not something that drives me at all. And so this past time I taught the class, I was like, I got to give them like a prize or something. So I went out and I bought some Starbucks gift cards for the groups that did well. Because I realized there, if you're going to do a competition, there has to be a prize, but my brain doesn't necessarily go there because I'm not a yeah, it's not something that drives me. I like challenges. I don't feel like I have to be better than somebody else. Yeah, I like to do a good job and to do interesting and new things, but I don't feel like it has to be at the expense of other people. And that's where I struggle with it emotionally and mentally. Yeah.
So you mentioned where you started in ACI. What are you doing now as somebody who's been involved with it for quite a while?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I started in the 236 Material Science Committee. And then when I first started looking at committees, I would go to committees where people I knew were attending them. And so I went to the 201 Durability Committee, the 231 Properties of Concrete at Early Ages. I joined the S802 committee at that time, the Teaching Methods and Educational Materials. And then went through a process of which committees do I like and do I want to invest more time in, and which committees do I feel like they don't need me. And so I actually walked away from durability because there were so many good people in that committee who were really effective that I didn't feel like I was adding anything. So then I started taking sometimes in the direction that I started going in with committees, it was often based on a suggestion or an invitation or an interest on my end. And so for example, there's a committee called 240 Pozzolans, and my research started going toward the Pozzolan direction, but I hadn't joined the committee yet. So I started attending a few of the committees, realizing I liked what they were doing. They were reorganizing and reinvigorating what they were doing. So I joined that one. And I really enjoy that committee right now. Sometimes there's newer committees that form, like the 242 Alternative Cements Committee formed a few years ago. And when a new committee forms, there's a lot of opportunity to take it in new directions and help shape what direction it's going to go in. I would say with that one, I haven't helped shaped it. I've just been observing the directions that they're going in. But then also recently, I've joined the 565 Lunar Concrete Committee, which is really fun. And they have some really good talks and some really good ideas there. There's a lot of people looking into what would happen if we needed to use concrete or some sort of cementitious system for building in extraterrestrial environments. And it's exciting that ACI has an opportunity for that. Some of the other things that I've done too is I joined the 318A subcommittee of the building code several years ago and was invited to join that one and was hesitant at first because I'm not a structural engineer. I don't use the building codes, right? I don't teach structural design in my classes. And I thought, what am I doing here? And the chair at the time basically said, trust me, we need you. join the committee, see how it goes. And it's been great because the I like I like that committee because it's very focused on its tasks, and the tasks and the process proceed more quickly in some ways than other committees and in a more organized and defined fashion. Um, so I like that. I also like that by being part of that committee, it gives me a better understanding of the building code itself. I'm not sure I really would have opened it otherwise, since I don't do that work, but I do, and I dig through it and I try to understand where things have come from and where they're going and try to, I feel like through a committee like that, but many of them you can have an impact. And so in different committees have impacts in different ways, but I think that it's nice to be a member of a diversity of them so you can have, you can learn from them and then shape the ones that you think you have a voice that should be heard on those committees. Um, I will say too that going back to what I did with 240 of just attending for a little bit before joining, I think that's a good strategy in general for people who are interested in joining a committee. If you attend a few, see how you like it. See if you see that there's an opportunity to contribute. And there's not, it's like trying a class, right? You can just go for a couple of times. If you don't like it, you don't have to commit. And so that is a nice thing about ACI, that it is a system that allows you to try things out before you commit, and then also is generally welcome for volunteers to contribute their efforts. So I like that as well.
So it seems like you've been involved in a broad range of committees, which is really neat. ACI does provide the opportunities for, anything you're interested in, you can try out. I was really interested when you said that you left a committee that you felt wasn't needing you at the time. And I currently am struggling a little bit in my career, wondering where to focus my time, because as a graduate student, ACI was really important for me to be involved with. And I was able to meet a lot of people doing similar research. Now, as a professor focusing primarily on teaching, it is very difficult to fit ACI into my schedule, because if I'm teaching 3 classes a semester, going to a conference means I have to reschedule or provide virtual lectures for 6 courses, like 2 days of 3 classes. And I, apart from maybe the teaching methods and educational materials, see it as more of a research and industry focused organization than a really teaching focused organization. So I guess, could you give some advice about how to choose what you might need to quit or what you might need to focus your time on as far as where you want your career to go? And if you've had any other challenges or decisions that you've had to make along those lines.
Yeah. So I think, well, for starting with ACI, I think it's always helpful to remember that all of the members, the vast majority of the members at ACI are volunteer members, which means it's about what you're able and willing to contribute. And so it's a personal decision of how much you want to invest. I have a friend at ACI who dove into a lot of things really deep for a while, and I was just, at the surface with a few committees, and I asked her, I said, why did you why are you giving so much to ACI? It's just a huge amount of time. And she said, I give to ACI because what ACI has given to me. So it's basically, it's like any service organization. Like if you're part of a charitable organization, you give to the charitable organization because you get a sense of well-being from it. With ACI, she says, I get professional opportunities and other things. And so that's why I dive in so deeply. But the answer then also is, if you're not getting those things, it's okay to step back, right? And to reconfigure and to rethink your engagement. The other thing, what I would like to see, so one of the things that, that in my year as ACI president that I want to focus on is this concept of the member experience. And so I've been part of the membership committee, and the membership committee just changed its goal to, instead of being about member numbers, it's about member experience and trying to create a better member experience. And part of that could be, for example, for someone like you, can we make an opportunity for people to contribute to ACI and to receive benefits from ACI that isn't necessarily as much tied to in-person convention attendance? So for example, if S802 is your primary committee, can we make it so that S802 is more interactive between conventions with sharing content or providing content or creating more webinars or some sort of participation that helps people in your field that's more teaching focused engage with ACI better. So those are the types of things I think ACI should be doing moving forward, is create, and I think they have the platform and the opportunity to do it. It's about a committee suggesting that they want to pursue that, right? So that they want to engage in that way. But the possibilities are already there. It's about creating having the committee say, this is a priority for us. We want to engage more broadly. Another thing to note too is the Faculty Network Committee has in the past been primarily just an email list, but is starting to figure out what they would like to be and how they would like to support faculty better. And so that's a new opportunity to engage with that committee to help shape its future of how faculty are supported through ACI. So I think we need to remember that ACI is a living organization and that it's capable of change and its purpose is to serve the concrete community, and academics are part of that concrete community. In general, in terms of career development and advice for career development and those types of things, thinking back to when I was an assistant professor, it's so funny to think back into times of your life because I felt like I was so hapless and clueless back then. I really had no plan. And I did things that I thought were interesting and that I wanted to spend my time on. And in terms of teaching, how much time, in my case, since it's a research institution, how much time I spent on research versus teaching, how engaged you got with student activities like clubs, what direction you wanted to take your research in. And so as an assistant professor, it is a time of choices. And sometimes those choices feel constrained because you're constrained by the expectations of your university and of the field and of academia in general. You're highly constrained. But I think it's important to remember that you always have choices and it's your career. And if you try to make it match somebody else's career, you're not going to be happy. So if you always think about, I mean, it can't just be completely self-serving, right? It's not what you can't just think about what I want to do, right? But you have to think about where you want to be and how you can create the life that you want within the constraints that are placed upon you. And so I think when I was an assistant professor, I wasn't terribly driven by, am I going to get tenure or not? I was more driven by, can I do the research that I want and have the work-life balance that I want and do things the way that I want to do it, not try to fit a model that was being imposed upon me. And I think we often lose that, or people often lose that. And it's good to have a healthy reminder that it is your life and you get to make choices in it too. And there are your choices and mistakes. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes too. The mistakes, you own them, and then you try to learn from them. So, yeah.
That's some great advice. Thank you. I appreciate that as a professor just starting out.
Yeah, it's a really tough time. I was just talking to someone yesterday about the tenure process and how as soon as you start, you walk in that door and the clock starts ticking. And with COVID and post-COVID, and now in the research world, challenges with research funding, it is a really tricky time to be in and put external pressures on education systems. It's a tricky time to be an assistant professor. And so the big thing is to stay in contact with people at your university to make sure that you're getting the support that you need. And then use ACI and other organizations as your external community of support. Get help from other people. There's plenty of people at ACI who are also at teaching universities who can provide advice about how they've navigated their career path so far. And that's also a good resource to have. And I've certainly leaned upon that at ACI in my career as well. Megan, it's been a really enjoyable time speaking with you today. And I hope that we get to keep in touch too through ACI, or at least, online and email and that type of thing. And for the broader community watching this podcast, thanks again for joining us. And thanks for everyone for listening to this month's episode of Engineering Greatness. Please join us each month as ACI brings together pairs of young professionals in the concrete industry to engage in intimate conversations about their life and work. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And for more information on the American Concrete Institute, visit us online at concrete.org. See you next time.